Black Power, Black Beauty, Black by popular demand. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. One thing you gotta give Penitentiary II credit for is its dedication to continuity. I covered the first Penitentiary on Black's History Month 2 years ago, and I encourage you to go back and watch that. But even if you don't, Penitentiary II has you covered with this fancy story crawl, Star Wars style. Sometimes with a sequel like this, there's a tendency to change everything that was done in the previous film, especially when a bigger budget is involved. But kudos to director Jamal Fanica, director of MMA and the first Penitentiary, for actually keeping the story in line with the first movie, despite some casting changes. Penitentiary II once again stars Leon Isaac Kennedy as Martel Too Sweet Gordon. After being released from prison after winning that unrealistic boxing tournament from the first film, he moves in with his sister and her husband, played by Glenn Turman, to try to start a new life. But those old ghosts of the past sometimes have a way of catching up with you. In part 1, Gordon had to fight off a crazy inmate who wanted that butt named Half Dead. And I don't know what it is about Martel, but Half Dead still wants it, bad enough to break out of prison. Really, he just wants revenge for losing the Battle of the Booty to Martel, and immediately starts following him around everywhere he goes, along with his two goofy companions, one of which played another character in Penitentiary 1. This time around, Half Dead is played by Ernie Hudson instead of Badger Jola, who must have had a prior commitment or simply didn't want to do the sequel. Jola was excellent in the role, but Hudson is just as good, if not better. Yeah, he doesn't have the same raggedy facial hair, but it makes sense in the context of the movie, since he's an escapee. Half Dead apparently not only wants to affect Gordon physically, but also psychologically, because when he finally makes his move, he uses it to assault and kill an old girlfriend of Martel's, and then fights Martel for daring to give a damn. It's some stuff straight out of a horror movie. They kind of recreate their long, tight quarters fight from the first movie, and this is probably the most impactful scene in the whole movie, but it happens only 20 minutes in. I kept thinking, this is the main event. Why did they give it away so early? Well, that's because for whatever reason, deep down, the Penitentiary series is a boxing series. It was one of the few things that I found weak about the first movie, and I can only assume that Fanica is a massive boxing fan. Upon release, Martel was told that one of the conditions of his release was that he had to report to a boxing coach regularly, but Martel doesn't want to box anymore now that he's out, so he barely goes. The half-dead assault somehow convinces him that he should box to make something of himself. That's how flimsy the excuse is to get Too Sweet back into boxing. And the first person he fights now that he's out? Why, the same person he fought to get out of prison in the first place. Jesse the Bull Amos, played by the same actor, Donovan Womack. His old mentor from prison even gets out to help him train, a guy named Seldom Seen, who was originally played by Floyd Chapman, but is now played by Malik Carter from MMA and Black Belt Jones. Wish they could have gotten Chapman back, because Carter is usually a bad guy, so it's hard for me to see him as an old and wise mentor. The best way to describe what kind of movie Penitentiary becomes at this point is part sports movie, part comedy. The serious tone is mostly dropped in the second half, in favor of more of the silly antics that took place in the original film. Half Dead, a psychotic and menacing villain in the original, is turned into a literal clown, wig and all. Also, this movie is just Black Rocky. Too Sweet gets his ass whipped in the first fight with Amos, or the second fight, I guess technically, but people admire his heart enough that he continues fighting until he gets another shot at Amos, a supposed legitimate title shot, but in a prison. I don't remember if it was made clear or not whether Amos ever even got out of prison, but you can't call a movie Penitentiary with no pen. It even stars Mr. T, not as Clubber Lang though, as himself. This movie actually released a few months before Rocky III, but Rocky III was filmed first. So Sylvester Stallone, who was friends with Jamal Fanica, recommended T for the role. He's basically only there for star power. leaning real heavily into the silly in the second act. There's even a short appearance by Rudy Ray Moore, his last movie appearance, before taking a very long break, and then popping up in some music videos, the Martin TV show, and a very short cameo in the movie Baps. Even with the shift in tone and a very heavy reliance on the long boxing segments, Penitentiary II is a much better film than the first one. The character Too Sweet gets a lot more development, and the production and star power is greatly improved. I'm not a big fan of the boxing stuff, and I wish Half Dead was utilized better, but there's enough Jamal Fanica goofiness happening in the background of the boxing stuff to keep you invested. It's a bit of a Rocky ripoff, but as far as ripoffs go, you could do worse.